Hello and welcome to today's meeting of Democrats of Greater Tucson. It's just great to see everybody here today. We welcome you all. My name is Larry Bodine. My friend and colleague on the board, Michael Bryan, is going to act as co-host as well.
Hello, everybody. I'm Michael.
So, Mike, why don't you go ahead and unmute Kathy Ramage-White?
Kathy's already unmuted.
I am unmuted. You bet I am. Hello, everyone. Glad to see you're able to attend your Democrats of Greater Tucson meeting. In terms of being a member of the DGT, it's only $20 and it'll last you for the whole year. It's the best buy in town. I know folks always ask me why I'm a member, and I just go, well, why wouldn't I be a member? I'm saying it's the best buy in town. At a mere $20, you can't beat it. We have great speakers. We have a place where you can ask specifically for questions of our speakers. So that's very fun. So if you're not yet a member, please go to the DemocratsDGT.org and you can sign right on. Thanks a lot, and right back to our host.
Thanks very much, Kathy. Next up, we've got Sandy Binion, who can tell us about our upcoming programs. Go ahead, Sandy.
Thank you for Andrés for agreeing to speak today. Next week, we have Randy Freeze, who is presently a state rep LD9, but is running for House of Representatives from what is presently CD2. We have Kathy Hobbs, who is the present Arizona Secretary of State and now a candidate for governor of Arizona. And the following week, we will have Terry Goddard, who again is trying to get an initiative to do away with dark money. So we hope to see all of you on those. And of course, there's lots more coming after that.
Mike, do we have any participants with their hands raised?
Looks like Lucy Messing and Carol Borges have their hands raised at this time.
Marine moms will be packing their goods to send to the military overseas, things like candy or games. They're going to doing that on Saturday. And so anyone that has anything that had wanted to donate to them, my number is 296-9935. One of the things they need are checks because they have to pay postage to send them to our military people, which I think is a shame. Give me, if you're interested at all, give me a call. I'll talk to you about what all you can send and everything like that. Okay?
Any other announcements?
Lucy Messing.
You may have heard that the 3 petitions to fight the flat tax, the tax cap, and the attack on Prop 208 have been filed. The petitions have been printed. Now it's a matter of getting them here to Tucson, which I hope will be this week sometime. And then they will have a major kickoff at different hubs to pass out these petitions. Some of you were so fantastic and made it so that we could get Prop 208 on the ballot, and we passed it. And they have done everything that they can to negate our work, as I'm sure Andrés will share. And so I'm going to be asking you again, this time though, unfortunately, not to carry just one petition. It's 3 different petitions. Now, we don't need quite as many signatures, but we only have 90 days to do that. So I will have all the information. I'm going to come back to the same people who carried the first petition, so be waiting to hear from me. And then if anyone else is interested, please contact me, because we have to fight back and not let them get away with this crap. So thanks a lot.
Christina Early has her hand up. Let's go ahead and ask her to unmute.
Hi, everybody. We are going to have our Drinking Democratically happy hour again in July, July 28th, 4 to 6 p.m. And that's going to be at Monterey Court this time. We do have the registration link will be coming online here during the meeting. So we're asking if you could go ahead and just register so we know how many people are coming. The last meeting we had 23 Democrats. We gathered at Augustine's Kitchen. We had a great time talking politics, talking about life in general. It was a lot of fun. And we hope to do the same thing at Monterey Court. They have a happy hour menu. I'm waiting for that to get that sent out to everybody. They also have, starting at 6:30 on Wednesdays, a folk group that plays. So if you wanted to consider staying around, listening to some music and having some dinner, you can contact Monterey Court directly and get reservations for that evening. And I hope that everybody will mark your calendar. Once again, that's July 28th. At Monterey Court on Miracle Mile.
Hi, I just wanted to throw out about Monterey Court. It is open air and they do have misters and they use them well, and it's not hot, but it is open air and you need to know that and dress accordingly.
Well, thank you, Steve. Thank you, Christina. Thank you for all of the work and the research you've done setting up these happy hours. It's a wonderful opportunity for all of us to see each other in person. Let me introduce our speaker for today. See, Andrés.
Still here, Larry. It's good to see you.
All right, awesome. So let me tell you all a little bit about Andrés. Andrés, at age 29, was elected to the State House in LD3 in 2018 and re-elected in 2020. Now, LD3 includes Tucson's downtown and west side. It's one of the most diverse districts in Arizona, and it includes neighborhoods and barrios, as well as the Yaqui Nation. And as a representative in Arizona, Andrés has opposed Governor Ducey's disastrous $1.5 billion income tax cut for the wealthy. He's filed legislation to restore funding to community colleges, something that's sorely needed. He voted against a bill that would have preempted cities from passing new energy regulations. And having himself recovered from COVID last November, Andrés continues to support access to health care. Andrés is also a board member of Planned Parenthood in Arizona. He's on the board of the City Center for Collaborative Learning and also with Literacy Connects. And with that, Andrés, the floor is yours.
Well, hello, DGT, and of course to you, Mr. President. Larry, thank you so much for the kind words. I'm grateful that you have an incredible team and all of your board members who are keeping the train going. And good afternoon, fellow Democrats. I'm Andrés, and it's an honor to be here with you on this Monday afternoon. I cannot believe that it is already July, but here we are, and I understand some of you are away in different parts of the country, and all of us here suffering in triple-digit weather are certainly wondering why we didn't get an invitation. I have a very brief part of my presentation that I'd like to have with all of you, and then we'll go straight into the conversation that I hope to have, which is a one-on-one. Given that Larry's already talked to you a little bit more about me, I'll tell you about Legislative District 3 and also share with you the map in particular. You'll see on the further east boundary, that's Campbell Avenue. It's really teeny, so you can't see it too much. Goes up all the way into the Amphi Flowing Wells area, the entire west side in the Tucson Mountain Park, the Pascua Yaqui Nation, as Larry mentioned, and then that little south side there portion is in between Ajo and 12th Avenue. It's a huge district, folks. And if you're curious a little bit more about the specifics, the demographics of Legislative District 3, 7th largest minority majority district in Arizona. It is a Latino majority district, and you'll see the vast impact. 2 congressional districts, 5 school districts, and an incredibly diverse representation of all the things that make Southern Arizona special. I was elected in 2018. I really came in with the idea that what we've got to do, especially with the close margin that we have at the state house and in the state Senate, 31 Republicans, 29 Democrats in the state house, 16 Republicans and 14 Democrats in the state Senate. I mean, we've got to be able at some point to be able to understand that when we're talking about the issues we will talk about in the next couple of minutes that we have together, these really should be shared values and not a blue or red value. We are Arizonans, and for those of us who want to be able to be here and protect the precious natural resources that we have, why don't we start there as an introduction to some of my priorities at the state capitol? If you have lived in Southern Arizona, I'm seeing folks on this call who are very familiar with our history and who've been incredible champions for our environment. I have the distinct honor of serving as your ranking Democrat at the State House on the Natural Resources, Energy, and Water Committee. This is where we are supposed to discuss all of the important areas in which we are going to be protecting our state's land, air, and water. And no surprise, there's kind of a broken record when you hear about the legislature. Are we actually talking about those important critical issues, like how we're going to solve the issues of our time, be able to protect those water supplies that are crucial? I mean, Lake Mead is literally in a continued drought and has been for several years now. What are we doing about it? And so I come to you from the perspective of accountability at this point, because we shouldn't have to have a situation where we literally are seeing the Gulf of Mexico be on fire, have our desert absolutely hemorrhaging in terms of drought, and then this incredible heat reminds us of the need in front of us. One of the unique parts of my district is the fact that we have a lot of the economic incubators of Southern Arizona, downtown, 4th Avenue, the University of Arizona, community colleges from the Desert Vista campus on the south side to Pima Community College downtown and Pima Community College West. It has been an honor to be able to continue to introduce the prime legislation every year on the Democratic side that would restore funding to our community colleges, because you may know this already, maybe you don't. The state of Arizona has not provided ongoing funding to Pima and Maricopa community colleges since 2015. That is really a travesty when we talk about supporting job incubation, workforce development, and preparing our workforce. One of the issues that has really come up over the last year as we've experienced and are now recovering from COVID-19 is the lack of affordable housing in Southern Arizona. And really, it's a statewide issue. The local perspective is that prior to the pandemic, we had 30 Southern Arizonans being evicted from their homes every single day, folks. Let me say that 30 folks were being evicted every single day. Thank goodness for a new Biden administration that has extended the CDC moratorium on evictions and that has provided the American Rescue Plan for us to be able to keep Arizonans in their homes. But the reality is that our state budget, the one that we just approved that rewards Arizona's millionaires and billionaires with hundreds of thousands of dollars in tax cuts, allocates $0 to the State Housing Trust Fund this year at a time when at its highest 10 years ago, it was at 40 million, folks. You saw the information earlier. I represent a very poor district, 33,000 at average annual income. And so when we think about the last year and everything we went to, the food banks, the resiliency, the people that helped us all get by, I have to go back to why I ran for office in 2018. That was being able to be there for our kids, especially those in our K-12 schools. I'm the product of a first generation family that ultimately dreamed of a stronger tomorrow. Was the first person in my family to graduate from college. And we knew that the equilibrium and all of that was going to be a quality education. And we are tremendously shortchanging not only our kids and our teachers at the state legislature, but ultimately the families who are going to be depending on a strong public education system. I want to give a very big shout out to our first responders and all of our frontline workers who ultimately were a big part of the last year, especially our essential workers. I was proud to be endorsed in 2018 and 2020 from all of the state's leading union organizations. And I really carrying that with the biggest and proudest badge of honor, because I really do think that if we don't have a strong middle class, if we don't have strong healthcare protections and workers' benefits and workers' rights, then what is the American dream anymore? And they've really been there for all of us throughout this pandemic. And really, as I start to think about our conversation today, as I was preparing for this, folks, I mean, let's talk about the hopes and dreams of the people who are absolutely wondering what their government is going to look like moving forward. How will the federal government, your state government, your local governments be able to work together to be able to use this place as a strong partner in our work? I think Washington gets a lot of bad, what can we call it, folks? A lot of times folks just wonder is what's happening at the state capitol, same way that people are trying to figure out what it means at their state legislature. My perspective is that all politics is local. The best thing that we can do to keep bringing folks together is to be able to recognize that the power of our democracy is electing the kind of people that we want to represent us. And I think when I began that conversation, Democrats of Greater Tucson, with you in 2017, when I was still a candidate, I hope that I've been able to fulfill the promise of a good representative who is paying attention to the issues that matter most. There are LD3ers on this call who I think have paved the way for a young kid like me to have a chance at the state capitol. People like Craig and the two Lees and Bridget Richechi and John Yoakum, I see you all on this call, and I'm super grateful to be engaged in this conversation with all of you. That is all meant to be a kind of higher level preview of my shared priorities going into this conversation. And I think what you saw there, we're protecting our natural resources, advocating for our kids, and ultimately being there for a strong economy, a strong environment. And that's where I come to you, Larry. I come with you trying to figure out what we did in these last 6 months to piss off Arizona's top elite earners so much that they wanted to come back to us with the most disastrous budget proposal that we've ever seen. And look, when we have a $2 billion surplus and an estimated $4 billion surplus as a result of the incredible investment from Washington and the American Rescue Plan, I have had no problem since day one asking Governor Doug Ducey, what's up? Because ultimately the kind of investment that we are failing to see on the ground, community colleges that are not funded, folks who are working 2 or 3 jobs to make ends meet, situation where our universities don't even have to rely on the state legislature anymore because there is hardly any of your state dollars going to the state legislature. These are all things that are very, very prevalent that I think Arizonans are focused on. And so where do we go next, folks, I think is a lot of the questions of what we're hearing. And I'm inspired, believe it or not, about our ability to pass some voter initiatives in the next couple of years that ultimately will redo all of the damage that we've seen over the last 10 years. And I think the reason why every single time you are seeing such bad headlines coming from the legislature is because our power is growing, not only as a Democratic Party, but as a very, very awake electorate who is a woke electorate who is paying attention to years and decades of the kind of frustrating politics that really, wouldn't we all be better off if that $4 billion surplus got turned into investment where we can provide a stronger reality where teachers aren't going to the dollar store every single week to be able to get the ream of papers that they're needed. I mean, here we are with all of our potential and all of our ability. And one of the greatest things that I have the opportunity now in year 3 representing Southern Arizona and our Democratic caucus is to be in a position to be able to plead for investment in Arizona, because that is the only way that we are going to change these headlines, folks. I have the honor of being one of your Democratic board members on the Democratic Legislative Campaign Committee. That's like, those massive organizations that are always rating your inbox, asking for $5 or $10. We've got to do that nationally with big partners and bring in $1 million to the state, and they are paying attention. We are one of 7 key priority states, battleground states for 2022, folks, because of all of the incredible opportunity we have in front of us. I mean, next week you'll be hearing from gubernatorial candidates. The next couple of months will be spent on figuring out how every statewide office, from our treasurer to our secretary of state to our attorney general, are going to have strong Democratic candidates, because we're at the point where not only are we writing the next bright new chapter for our state, but ultimately I think there's a lot of energy, especially after what we've witnessed in the last year, don't you think? I'll stop there, Larry. I know you have a lot of questions, and ultimately, I despise presentations and PowerPoints. I also don't like talking about me. So the more that we can talk about the issues, let's go.
Andres, thank you so much for that inspiring talk. It's good to know that we have people like you in the legislature. Let me just get things rolling with a question, and that is the Democrats only need to flip 2 seats in the House and 2 seats in the Senate in the legislature, and then there's a Democratic majority. What do you see as the likelihood of that? And if it's possible, how would we go about doing that?
Well, I'm inspired, Larry, by Virginia. I'm inspired by all of the different organizing that we are seeing throughout the nation. And I think that, the Republicans passing these horrible voter suppression bills, I think, are ultimately the greatest gift that we can possibly have, because I think we will fight back and we will ultimately elect leaders who will repeal those laws and will work very diligently to, at the ballot box, be able to do what we do best here in Arizona, which is pass good legislation like 208 when our legislature refuses to invest in the everyday priorities that will help us all thrive, right, Larry? And so, look, the conversation that I've had with my very safe Democratic Legislative District number 3 over the last 2 or 3 years, and some folks kind of looked at me funny when I recommended this 2 years. If you're living in a safe Democratic district, let's not take anything for granted in the next year. But what we've got to do is really commit ourselves to beginning a conversation with folks in those key states. We won't know, Larry, what the new legislative boundaries are going to be as a result of redistricting until perhaps this winter. In the winter, I hope that one of the main conversations that DGT is going to have is figuring out where we are going to be putting all of our resources, and perhaps we'll have 1 or 2 targeted Southern Arizona areas. I mean, we still have very competitive districts, even with those districts like 9 and 10 represented by incredible Democrats right now. We've got to protect that base, and we've also got to go to the LD11s. We've got to go to the current LD6s and Flagstaff. And I think what we learned in 2020 after not securing some of those majorities that we had so hoped for, and by the way, there was a pandemic that happened in the middle of that. We weren't able to have the one-on-one conversations that our party is so notorious for having. That's a strategic decision that I think we made during a public health pandemic that was appropriate. 2022, we're going to be able to do something much more focused, much more being able to compare and contrast what's at stake here, folks. I mean, every statewide office is coming up, and you've got to visit those communities 3 or 4 times, in my opinion. And when you're sending the postcard, it needs to be followed up with the phone call. And when you don't have the ability to connect, you go leave a pamphlet on their door and say, we want you to be engaged. And if you have any questions, here's our cell phone. It's an incredible relationship building process, Larry, and I think it's one that we have been doing for several decades, frankly. And when we make that kind of investment, it works.
The question I have for you is, President Biden is wanting to do the 2 years of free childcare and the 2 years of free college, which I think is wonderful, which I think is really important. And so, but if the state is not funding the junior colleges now, then how is that going to work?
Thank you so much, Christina. I really appreciate the question. Look, I think ultimately the community colleges and our universities are going to benefit from any plan that the federal government puts in front of us, whether it's debt relief, whether it's providing a promise scholarship, protecting our dreamers, who, by the way, are still not a part of any equation that I've heard from this administration. And I'm a little frustrated, I will say, coming to DGT about that, because I've been thinking a lot about what we learned over the last couple of years, right, Christina? When we had President Obama in 2008, for those first 2 years, we had the same situation we have right now. Democratic majorities and the ability to move legislation forward, but we get so reluctant because we look at the next election year that then we leave a whole generation of people behind. And I think you probably just got me with the chiltepin in this mouth on a tangent about our undocumented, because they're really not getting the investments that we've been promising them for multiple elections now. But let's go back to what you asked about, Christina. You asked about our schools. The legislature has refused to fund ongoing state funding to the community colleges, just as they've not fulfilled their promise to make our university education as free as possible, as is indicated in our Constitution, right? If you read the Arizona Constitution, I guess what I'm saying is those institutions have moved forward without the investment of the legislature. And I just dream of a different kind of investment. I think, if we can do anything to make higher education more affordable, why aren't we doing it? It's good for jobs, it's good for the economy, it's good for everybody. And it's especially made in mind for those where, perhaps the four-year program doesn't work. Perhaps it's the trade school, perhaps it's the certificate, the driving certificate that, is going to be crucial. So we will be able to take any federal resource, as I think the Republicans won't admit we've already done in the last year with all of these American Rescue Plan, and that no Republican voted for in the Congress. So let's keep going. John, my favorite. Hi, John. It's good to see you.
Let's ask John to unmute his microphone so he can ask his question. And then we'll be going to an early question in the chat that I'll relay.
Well, first, Andrés, you're doing a terrific job, so thank you for that. We know that you are in the House, but there's a lot of national attention right now in the Arizona Senate and the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. They say they're done and that they won't report for another 2 or 3 months. If they had any fraud, they'd tell us from the rooftops, wouldn't they? So they don't have any fraud to report. Do you know anything about it? Do you know anything about the bamboo dust? Are we being bamboozled?
Thank you for the question, for being an incredible supporter of all the mobilization that we've had in LD3 and the various, districts that have come from it. You've been there supporting our initiatives, and I'm always mindful of champions like you who have done that for a long time. We're talking about the scam of a fraud, a fraud that's happening at the Coliseum up in Phoenix, and I think that every Arizonan at this point is looking to figure out where the light is going to end at the end of that tunnel, because it's been not only an embarrassment to our state and has been a mockery of our democracy nationally. I mean, just turn on any news program now to see this fraud being spotlighted for what it is, which is a huge just travesty of the biggest proportions we've ever seen. And also what I try to understand, John, when I'm figuring out my colleagues and why they would be so attached to this idea that they'll find something, despite, I'm preaching to the choir here, right? But I mean, Governor Ducey signed off on this election, the Democratic Secretary of State, a Republican County Board of Supervisors. I mean, you are all, for the most part, have participated in election observation in Arizona at one point in your life. And you know that there is every single party represented in that room, in that ballot counting. And the notion that something has gone wrong when we have seen actual intervention from the former president calling our election officials rather here in Arizona, or Republican friendly county commissioners. We need a Department of Justice investigation at this point to figure out what was going on, in my opinion, because this has never happened before. We've never seen it. And I am shocked that for as much as my colleagues have been paying attention to this former president and all of his supposed greatness, he told us if he would lose Arizona, he would never come back to Arizona. That's literally what Trump said. And what are the headlines from over this weekend? He's coming back. Doug Ducey will continue to put on his best suit in front of him and try to impress him. And it's like, Trump don't like you, like, hello, what are you going to get through your head is what I want to tell them. I don't know where we're at, John. I think this was all an attempt to get more fundraising dollars in Arizona because they're losing their majority. The Republican Party's fundraising is going through the roof because of the Callie Ward's ridiculous media pursuits every single day. And it just pisses me off more than anything. So sorry, John, it's not a very politically correct answer. I think I'm with the rest of Arizona. I'm tired of it.
Appreciate your lack of politics. That's good. So I have a question. He chimed in immediately. Any ideas on supply side augmentation of water? I assume what he wants to know is what the Democratic Party's ideas are for ensuring a sustainable supply of water for Arizona going into the future.
Well, thank you, Michael. And it's one of the issues that I think is critical that really nobody is giving the attention to at the legislature. I think Arizonans know and see the writing on the wall. We have Lake Mead that I mentioned earlier. We've got some folks know this and some folks don't. So I guess I have to just pause and let you know. Did you know that we have a Saudi Arabian company coming to Pinal County here in Arizona, growing alfalfa because they used up all of their water reserves in Saudi Arabia, found a good, convenient place, an agriculture-friendly lobbying group to be able to grow their alfalfa here in the great state of Arizona, use our water supplies, send it back on a boat or on a plane to the Middle East. The urgency for water conservation is absolutely nowhere at the state legislature. I think agriculture has had a tremendous lobbying force for several decades. They will tell you that they've adapted, but when you try to introduce legislation, as I have, to discuss what is the bad word at the legislature is called water metering. I mean, most houses are metered. You know how much you're putting in and you know how much you're using, and we refuse to have that same kind of standard and accountability with folks throughout the state. We also have yet to fully fund the Department of Water Resources. We have underfunded the department for years at this point. The last meaningful plan that we had for water conservation was in the 1980s when the Groundwater Management Act was enacted. Arguably, some will tell you the drought contingency plan a couple years ago, which I voted on, was another attempt. But, you know, we've got $5 million for conservation in that proposal, that latest proposal. That's nothing to be able to fund the hydrologists that we need and ultimately to get us expanding the kind of groundwater districts that, like the Central Arizona project, that if you give them the financing, the resources, the infrastructure, it means good jobs, it means smarter planning and all of the above. And it's one of those issues where does the party stand? We want to conserve. We want to invest in the science that's going to be able to ensure that supply is there. We all firmly believe in the 100-year water supply, which should never be questioned. I mean, I don't know about you, but as a homeowner, I'd like to have a guarantee that there will be water going through that faucet. And let me also remind ourselves that not everything is rosy in Arizona. The fact that COVID-19 let us know that there were folks, our sisters and brothers and everything in between on the Navajo Nation with no running water in 2021. I mean, get real, folks. That's what I like to remind my folks my colleagues at the legislature is, what world are you living in?
Barbara has had her hand up for a while, waiting very patiently. Ask her to unmute and ask your question, Barbara.
Thank you. Hi, Andre. I've just had a discussion about several conversations he has had with people in his neighborhood, in his community, who are postal workers. And several of them have experienced rather severe heat events, heat exhaustion, someone that had to go to a hospital. These are people who are required to drive around in these go-karts with no air conditioning. And there's no protection for them from extreme heat exposure. As you know, we have 110-degree temperatures out there or worse, and it is life-threatening. What can we do to require that the Postal Service protect these workers and have them be able to work in cool spaces? What can we do about outdoor worker protection altogether?
But Dr. Warren, thank you for the question. And I don't think that there would be an opportunity for me to be able to proceed with answering this question unless I highlight your work and advocacy in this arena, ensuring that our neighborhoods are resilient, that we are taking care of one another. I mean, these are universal concepts that I think ultimately are the next steps to the work that you and I have been working on heat worker prevention standards. I would look at the legislation that you and I have drafted, and regrettably, you won't be surprised, Democrats of Greater Tucson, that a Democratic bill went nowhere at the state legislature. But that is more often than not the instance that happens. And look, I'm sick and tired of having to pick up the paper or get that news alert that somebody has died in this desert heat of ours because of our inability to address the fact that people are hurting, that what people are ultimately just doing is trying to get by, right? I mean, Dr. Warren, last week you and I were a part of a conversation where I mentioned the tragic story of a 2-year-old woman passing away in Phoenix because she forgot to pay her bill, didn't have the money, sent $120. She owed $170. So for $50, her life ended. And I'm glad that our utilities are starting to pay attention to this issue, because how many folks have we lost not knowing that they just couldn't afford to pay their utility bills, pay their electricity to keep the air conditioning running. And as it relates, Dr. Warren, to the very tough conversation about heat workers, it shouldn't be tough. You know, one of the things that we were trying to figure out, because other states have developed heat worker protections, what's hot and what's not hot, folks. The bill that I introduced is 100 degrees, triple digit weather. Dr. Warren, I know, will tell me that's too high, right? We've got people who are hurting in 90-degree weather and above, right? And so it's this crazy balance that I think you and I are just going to have to keep working on with the stakeholders, working with our labor partners, and trying to let Arizonans know who may, because what they're going to do is they're going to say this is an anti-business bill. There's nothing like good business, having good workers who are protected, who have water and who have shade, which is what our bill does, right, Dr. Warren?
One other piece of this, and that is that these folks are leaving their jobs and going to work for the private delivery services, which have air-conditioned vehicles. Is there anything we can do with the post office?
Got it. Well, and we're gonna have to play very delicately with this for sure. And I think there's some conversations in my head that are already going about the folks we need to talk to, Dr. Warren, about that. And I agree with you. It's the conversation that we have with the Department of Water Resources and hydrologists when we don't pay them enough and they don't feel valued under the state of Arizona. What are they going to do? They're going to go take care of their families and get more resources, more benefits from a private sector company. And I just think it's an example of where we've got to continue asking for investments in the Postal Service that are critical so that we can keep our processing center open and alive, but also be there for the people, hardworking men and women and all in between who are helping with getting us our most essential deliveries and services.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andres. Now we're going to hear from Lucy Messing. Would you unmute, Lucy?
Thank you. Hi, Andres. Good to see you.
Hi, Lucy. It's good to see you.
Now, I was getting very optimistic when we were so close with the 2931 and the 1416, but I'm going to tell you why I'm worried. And that's because we have a number of Democrats who are leaving office to run for higher office. So I want to ask you, how do you see that playing out, and how that might impact us actually taking that majority?
Sure. Well, Lucy, thanks for the question. And of course, for you started this meeting kicking us all off where we need to be, which is taking these legislative issues, these budget concerns that we have that have been absolutely an attempt to undo the will of the voters and to continue to harm our teachers, our students. You're at the forefront of every fight, so thank you for it. And you're right. Right now, we've got a tremendous treasure gap that's going to happen ultimately. This shortage of incredible years where we've got my estimates on the House side have indicated that at least 19 of the 29 House Democrats will be headed out, and it's scary. And I think change is always going to be difficult, Lucy. But look, we've got an incredible opportunity, an incredible framework here where we've got investments coming into Arizona unlike we've ever seen. We've got to send back Senator Kelly to the U.S. Senate. We've got to elect a Democratic governor, a Democratic attorney general, secretary of state, and a Democratic legislature. And I wouldn't be working so diligently every single day to bring in those resources for a blue legislature if I didn't believe we were that close. Candidates come and go. I mean, do you even remember who was in my seat 20 years ago or 10 years ago? Chances are DGT probably does, right? Chances are DGT does. But I guess what I'm saying is we are here supposed to be temporary office holders of these incredibly important seats. And so let's go find good candidates is what I want to do. I feel like, I'm looking at many on this call who might be interested in doing that. And I'm excited about those conversations because there's somebody that who's going to step up and who's going to be able to kick off right where we left. And redistricting, I think, is going to be the big mystery until then, right? We have no idea. And I think all of us are wondering where we live and where our closest, friends live as well, so that we can have good people running.
Thank you, Andres. Let's hear a question from Craig Markin next. Please unmute yourself, Mr. Markin.
Andreas, I realize I will preface this with Arizona thinks it's the Wild West, but is it possible to have some rational gun legislation, such as liability for gun owners that when the guns are used in a crime, or even possibility take something like automatic or semi-automatic rifle ammunition and put an environment tax, if you will, on it to make the shells cost maybe $3 to $4 a piece?
Yeah, I got you, Craig, and thank you. And I promise the LD3 members didn't plant all of these questions for their representative. Craig and one have the most incredible front yard, and then you know that you're at a good person's home when you knock on their door, and I've done that a couple of times running for office now. Craig, I don't think that with the current legislature we will get anywhere close to addressing public health and ultimately gun violence in that same sphere. I mean, gun violence is absolutely a public health issue. And I believe that ultimately we have incredible Southern Arizona legislators who are leading on this issue, who have been for several years, including Dr. Faris, who will be joining you very soon. I mean, the legislation is all there. We have introduced it time and time again. I think we've seen local jurisdictions try to come in and be able to make up for the difference where our legislature has not. But what do we do in reverse, right? At the legislature, we get our feelings hurt and get really upset that a local jurisdiction tries to, regulate a certain industry or, conserve our environment. We had one Arizona town that tried to ban away plastic bags because we know they're harmful polluters. And what did the legislature do? They passed a preemption law that said you can't have any kind of, plastic bags in the state of Arizona be banned. I mean, it's ridiculous, the kind of power plays that happen. So until we, send a new legislature, I think we're going to keep getting the same results. And we're that close. Despite us not getting the majority, folks, last year, we came one closer in the Senate. That is significant. That means we've been able to stop some tremendously horrible bills, even though I know you know of some bad bills that we passed. There were worse ones, including Corporation Commission bill. That did not move because it didn't have all of the votes on the Republican side. That's optimistic and ultimately an indication of every vote mattering.
Thank you, Andres, for that answer. Larry, do you have any questions you want to ask? We don't have anybody else with their hands up right now.
Just had a question for you, Andres, about one of the voter suppression bills that shortens the deadline for when voters can cure a ballot. You get a sheet that's like 3 feet long and printed on both sides, and some people forget to sign their ballot. And now they have to fix it by 7 p.m. on election day. What kind of an effect is that going to have?
Another attack on local jurisdictions who have done fantastic work. I mean, the county recorders and the county elections departments throughout the state, 15 of them tasked with ensuring that our democracy is held to the highest standards, are still to this day giving a solid, clean record on the November 2020 election and a report card ultimately, right, on what happened there. And so what is it going to mean, Larry? I mean, I think we are going to have to pay close attention to what the citizen-driven effort is going to be in these next couple of weeks. Will there be an attempt to ask the voters to do what we do best, which is take power back into our own hands, given this legislature's refusal to acknowledge reality. But on the other hand, I'm convinced that every controversial bill, whether it was this particular bill that we're discussing on voter suppression, taking us back to the Jim Crow eras, or the fact that we passed one of the most extreme anti-abortion healthcare bills again in Arizona, focused specifically on genetic abnormalities. Every doctor and leading medical organization was telling Arizona we were headed in the right direction. What did we do? We said we're going to ignore every part of science. We're going to ignore women. We're going to ignore the healthcare, advocates. And so what do we do best? I think ultimately we have gotten, as we start to look at the time, right, and I'm seeing very few questions other than Susie's coming in. I was in college 10 years ago when this legislature passed in 2010, the absolutely disastrous SB 1070 that I think was the beginning of a 10-year commitment that national partners made to changing Arizona, right? We saw Jan Brewer divide families. We saw Joe Arpaio literally go into homes, tear families apart. And what did we get out of that? Over that time, we have seen our political landscape grow, working with the existing numbers. We've seen our influence absolutely go on a trajectory up. And the reason why we're seeing all of this awful legislation coming from the state capitol, as I said earlier, is because of our success. So we're on the final cusp of that 10-year plan that has literally been discussed as a promise by stakeholders around dinner tables in 2010 when they said, what the hell are we going to do to change this narrative? So now is like the worst time to say we can't do it anymore. We're going to do it. We are in the literal confines of the 10-year plan to be so close, with now literally one more representative on either side, House or Senate. Obviously, a Democrat is going to be in our favor in 2022. It's bound to happen, folks. We've just got to believe in it, and I do.
It looks like we have a question from Susie Anderson. Please unmute yourself, Susie.
Hi, Andrés. It's so good to see you. I appreciate all your work, and I appreciate your filling us in every month at the LD3 meetings. Thank you. My question is, Gabrielle Cazares Kelly and all of these are wonderful registrars across the state have been denied extra money for helping out with election costs. How do we help them? What can we do before we can change the legislature to facilitate their ideas to get more voters involved and be allowed to vote? Got any thoughts?
Well, I mean, it's silly, right? I feel bad that in our time together, we haven't been able to talk a little bit more about this last legislative session, but I have a feeling you're going to have a lot of speakers who will talk to you about the Ducey budget and all of its terrible ways in which it puts, us against one another. And one of those examples, Susie, thank you for the question, and it's an honor to be one of your state representatives. So we got the Secretary of State from having the ability to represent herself until the end of her current term. We're only talking about Katie Hobbs in this situation, where the Republicans and the governor stripped all of her legal power to represent her office in the courtroom. And then it's literally just made for her at the end of her term. That's when this restriction goes away. So they're playing politics with this situation. There was also this weird thing, Susie, that came out where they said no to additional resources for voter registration and supporting the county recorders, as they always do, right? That's not unusual. But they actually put resources and law behind voter registration for the game and fish department. And it as though there are no good Democrats or independents who go, get a fishing license for a day, right? Or who it's like the same, it's so piecemeal and blatant in front of you that they think their world will be solved by registering voters in the game and who are using game and fish licenses. It's just kind of an irony to me. I don't know. And it's an example, I think, of what local jurisdictions are going to end up having to do, Susie. We're lucky to be represented here in Southern Arizona now with the 4-1 Democratic majority. I am going to continue to push and encourage our local governments to, especially our counties, to be able to find good grant programs that are going to be able to support voter registration, because I think that's the only way it's going to happen, right? If Washington doesn't get its act together, if we don't reform the filibuster, if we don't pass the most significant pieces of voter protection initiatives like we are pleading with our federal delegation to do right now, our local jurisdictions are going to be covering up a lot of the work, I believe, because we have incredible advocates like the county recorder here in Pima County. But ultimately, our state legislature until 2022, they're in the business of shutting voters out right now, not welcoming voters in. So we'll show them the way it's done here in Baja, Arizona, is my answer.
Thank you for that answer. Andres, I'd like to use my personal privilege here as the co-moderator to ask you a question myself. You mentioned that you're very concerned about the Ducey budget, and beyond, the tax cuts, over half of them going to people making over $1 million a year. What are the worst aspects in your view of the Ducey budget?
Prop 208. I was elected at the height of the Red for Ed movement. I mentioned earlier, I'm the product of our public schools. I was also sick and tired of seeing our classrooms, our teachers, our kids shortchanged. The Ducey budget in 2020 is disastrous because 2021 is disastrous because it's a train wreck. Ultimately, we had 2018, and we were supposed to celebrate the governor's 0.02% increase for teachers. Not only did we say no to that, we said hell no, and then we came back with all of the legal signatures required to put the Invest in Education ballot on. And what did we have? The Ducey Supreme Court packed Supreme Court said no to us again. Then we won. Then we absolutely took our message right to the voters in the middle of a pandemic, took signatures. I mean, all of you, I imagine, circulated those petitions on this call. And what happened? We have an accounting spreadsheet gimmick right now that undermines all of that investment, that allows the top income earners in Arizona to get away with what voters said they had to do, which was help us pay for our schools. And I don't know why a wealthy Arizonan, I don't care how much money you have, if it's $1 million or $1 billion, why wouldn't you want to support our kids? Why wouldn't you want to support their dreams? And especially when you have the resources to do it. And this budget, I sit on the Ways and Means Committee, there was literally a spreadsheet accounting formula that was used that allows small businesses to now claim their earned income under what's called an S-corp. We're getting very wonky. And then that allows them to completely override anything that they would have had to pay through Prop 208. That's not fair. That's literally, making the rules as you're flying the plane. And that's what the majority did. And aside from that, $2 billion in permanent tax cuts, it takes 3/4 of the legislature to reverse any kind of that action. They knew what they were doing. They also said that they were doing this because they may not have the majority in a year or two. So remember that when you're frustrated about the legislatures, that they are so darn scared of us. They know we're coming, and yes, we are Democrats of Greater Tucson.
Andres, thank you so much for your inspiring presentation and all the good work you're doing in the legislature. We're out of time, and I was wondering if you would be kind enough to conclude our meeting and tell us how we can support you and how people can get a hold of you.
Sure. Well, thank you, Larry. I'm super grateful for the opportunity to be here with all of you. I just in the chat put my personal cell phone number as well as my personal email. I think you'll find over my 3 years in office that I return every phone call, I return every text. I'm very accessible. That cell phone of mine is published in the Citizen Clean Elections pamphlet because I think the best kind of representation I can give is direct representation. Grateful to be here. I'm not quite ready to announce that I'm running for re-election again, but don't be surprised if I do for another term, folks. And with that, all of you have been a crucial part of sending me to the state capitol. Thank you for believing in me 3 years ago, 2 years ago, last year. I hope again for a 2022 term. It's an honor to represent you and our shared values. Thank you, Democrats.
All right. Thank you, Andres.
Thank you, Andres.
We're going to conclude the meeting. So long, everybody.